Hi, Alana Terry here. I hope that you are finding this week to be very, very productive and encouraging, and that your creativity is soaring so much. I want to talk today about the different ways that we find motivation. And this is really going to depend on your unique personality and your unique motivational tendency. And once you learn what motivates you, this can really have a drastic and dramatic impact on your word count, your productivity, how you create good habits, and things like that. So a lot of this is based on the framework that was developed by Gretchen Rubin in her book, The Four Tendencies. It's also something that I talked about in an earlier episode of the Successful Writer podcast called The Key to Motivation, but this is so pivotal that I want to address it a little more thoroughly. So basically, the idea here is that we have four different ways that we might find motivation. And everybody is basically going to fall under one of four categories of motivation. Oh, it's my puppy. So let's talk about the puppy motivational style. So I call this style puppies. Gretchen Rubin calls them obligers. And you know you're a puppy if you find your motivation from outside. Really good explanation of what a puppy kind of looks like in real life. It's somebody who has a hard time getting things done for themselves, but they are never going to let a friend down. They're never going to let an employer down. So for example, in the writing world, if you're part of an anthology and you know that your book is due on June 1st, your book is going to be absolutely done by June 1st because you know people are counting on you to get that done. However, if you're just writing a book for yourself, there's no pre-order date, there's no commitment, you might find it a lot harder without external motivating forces like an editor breathing down your back saying, hey, where's the book? You might find it harder to stay motivated. And so the key to your success, if you are a puppy, is to always find motivation outside of yourself. So maybe you think about your readers and how much your readers are just dying for this next book. So instead of trying to muster up all of your discipline and saying, I must get this done so that I can be productive, say, hey, Joe needs to know what's going to happen to my main character because Joe is anxiously waiting. And as a puppy, as an obliger, as a people pleaser, you do not want to let Joe down. Puppies are also going to, in general, find really good success with accountability groups. A great way this could look is if you and a friend agreed to meet like at 9 a.m. on Zoom every single day to write for an hour. If you are a puppy and you rely on external motivation, you are going to show up there because you don't want to let your friends down. So accountability is really key for a puppy, and also just being other focused. So instead of, again, just thinking I should write this book so that I can earn more money, maybe you say I need to write this book so that I can buy my mom that vacation that she's been wanting, things like that. When you're focusing on serving others, since you are such a people pleaser, it's going to be more motivating for you than when you're just focusing on yourself. Another thing that works pretty well for puppies will be things like telling your editor you're going to have the book to them by a specific date, because then you know that if you don't make that date, that you're inconveniencing somebody else. So again, a puppy or an obliger, as Gretchen Rubin calls them, is somebody who relies on external motivation to get things done. So now let's do the exact opposite. Let's talk about people who only rely on internal motivation to get things done. I call these type of workers ants because they tend to be, no, sorry, this is the salmon. We'll get to the ants next. The salmon rely on internal motivation. If you're a salmon, basically you don't need someone breathing down your neck to meet your deadlines. You don't want someone breathing down your neck to meet your deadlines because you're internally motivated. You've got the discipline and the drive to get things done, and you don't need an accountability partner in general. You don't need outside accountability, outside deadlines. You're pretty driven on your own. So as a salmon, one thing that it's important for you to remember is that you're probably a little bit more prone to things like workaholism because you do have very good work habits in general. And so you just need to be careful to allow time off, schedule time off, things like that. That's really important for salmon. I also would encourage you to be a little bit careful when it comes to accountability, because sometimes if you're a salmon, accountability can almost backfire. It's going to feel like nagging, or worst case scenario, it's going to feel like you're the one doing all the work and all the people around you aren't holding their share, right? As an ant, for example, if you know that you've got a novella for a collection that's due, it's just going to get done. You don't need someone sending you weekly reminders, weekly updates, things like that. And in fact, that can be kind of annoying. And when you're working with people who do need that kind of accountability, you can get annoyed by them. So just remember, not everybody gets internally motivated like you do. And so it's important to just be kind of gracious and gentle, especially when you're working with other authors who maybe do need a little more accountability. If you're an ant, another thing to keep in mind is just that you're really good with sticking to your commitments. So it's okay to give yourself kind of the hard and fast deadlines. It's okay for you to set those. You don't need someone else to set them for you. So instead of having an editor say, hey, this needs to be turned in on Tuesday, you know when it's due, you can get it done, and you can really lean in to your ability to stay internally motivated. Just be careful that you don't let that lead to creative or kind of work burnout. Now let's talk about the ants. The ants have a combination of both of the tendencies we've already talked about. Okay, so we talked about the puppies who rely on external motivation. We talked on the salmon who get motivated internally. If you're an ant, you've got the best and the worst of both sides. You rely on both internal and external motivation. This is another tendency that can lead a little bit towards workaholism, but it also means that you're pretty good at just sticking to things, sticking to your deadlines, getting them done. So if you are an ant, you are most likely the type of author who loves writing down goals at the start of each week and crossing things off your to-do list. So things like giving yourself a little check mark for every 1,000 words you've written, or writing your to-dos on a Post-it so that at the end of the day, you can kind of collect all those Post-its and see how many tasks you've done. Those are the types of things that are going to really, really appeal to you as an ant. And one thing I encourage you to do if you are an ant is just to remember that life does happen and to not let that discourage you. Remember that family is important, health is important, things besides work are important. And sometimes as an ant, those types of things can be hard to let go of. So that covers the first 3 tendencies. And then the last tendency, which happens to be the least common amongst the population, is what Rubin calls a rebel, or the animal that I give it is a cat. A cat doesn't rely on internal or external motivation. So if you're a cat, you have a really hard time sticking to any one thing for very long. And that can be frustrating, but it can also be an amazing creative strength. So basically, a cat is never going to do something just because somebody tells them they need to, or even because they feel like they should. In certain areas, like maybe diet or fitness, this can be frustrating for a cat. Sticking to a budget can be really hard, that type of thing. But actually, as a creative, if you're a cat, you can really lean into your cat-like tendencies. You're going to more likely be the kind of person who writes when inspiration hits, who maybe has a flurry of words for a few days and then, take a step back. Your workspace and your work schedule might not look as disciplined as other authors, and that's totally okay, because if you are a cat, then too much structure, too many goals, too much planning into the future, that can actually leave you feeling creatively stifled. And so if you're a cat, I would just encourage you to lean into the ability to be that flexible, to recognize every day doesn't have to look the same, to recognize that setting big, grandiose goals can kind of freak you out creatively, and instead absolutely lean into the creative spark that is inside you. So I hope that of those 4 tendencies, you were able to recognize the one that applies to you and to get some tips on how you can become even more productive and even more creative while working under the tendency that best describes you. So hope that was helpful, and we'll talk to you soon.